Hey everybody, it's good to get to spend a few minutes with you sharing again. And if for those of you in our community life groups that are following along, as our year has progressed, we are quickly nearing the end, and it is hard to believe. And even saying that sometimes, just thinking about it creates a little bit of worry and anxiety and sense of being overwhelmed. But as I've talked with many of you, I'm very proud of how you are persevering and getting through the craziness that this year has been, and the how hard this spring semester has been with not many breaks. And so we are making it. And so today, this afternoon, I want to share with you the scripture. We'll place it on the screen for us. And I want you to hear the promise that is given here in this scripture. So this was written to a group of believers. I say this a lot, but it's a group of believers just like us. Now they may have lived in a different part of the world, and they may have faced some very different circumstances dealing with their day in and day out lives, but they were people going through all the same types of questions about life as we do. And here, this promise that the author is writing to this group of believers, and in the letter of Second Peter, uh, we find this verse, chapter 1, verse 3. His divine power has given us everything we need for a godly life. I'm going to read it again. His divine power has given us everything we need for a godly life. Now, if we start to get into questions about wants and needs, and what is it that we want in this life, or what is it that we need in this life, it can get really, I think it's okay to say this, it can get really sideways pretty quick. We may identify things in our life that we may say that they're a need, but it's really a want. We may overlook things in our life that are real basic needs, but because we are so used, at least maybe in this country or in this phase of life, that we just have them that we don't even think about. So let me just give you a few examples. A need that we all have is things like food, uh, shelter, those kind of basic provisions. A need that we probably all desire is good health. But I don't want to make any assumptions here. But I know for a lot of us where we are now, those are things that are just forgiven, or just assumed. Excuse me. Turn on the tap and clean water comes out. If hungry, just go up to case and swipe a card. Our dorms, our places, our apartments, our homes are pretty safe, pretty secure. In the shelter, you turn a knob and it turns on the heat when it's cold, or turns on the AC when it's hot, right? And so we may think of some of those basic needs, but we overlook those things. Other things in our lives, and the first thing that comes to my mind is to go, I need Wi-Fi. I need Wi-Fi to exist, but that's really not true. It would be a really hard, difficult adjustment, but we could survive. I could survive. Life would be different than it is now, but we could figure it out. But here in this verse, there's something much more rooted in who we are as beings, way more than just trying to exist and get through for survival with needing things like food and shelter and water. But here, this idea of everything we need to live a godly life is um, rooted in something so much foundational. This is what we can really think about from the spiritual side of things, the soul side of things. And here, Peter's saying, you. have been given everything you need. So I want you to think about that. You don't have, can't provide water for yourself, right? You can't snap your fingers and water just appears, or shelter or food, right? Those are things you have to get from the outside and put inside of yourself. But when it comes to a godly life, here Peter says it's already inside of you. You already have these things. We talk a lot about our identity being a child of God, a person of worth. You were created in the image of God. You have a true self that is inside of you, that is untainted, that is unblemished, that has been with you from the beginning. It'll always be there, and no matter what you do, good or bad, it always is there. And so much of our life is the uncovering of that, the rediscovery of that truth. And here I think this is true. That power, that divine spark, right? It is already there, and everything is in that. And that's what we really need to live out this godly life, when we can access it. That when I was growing up, there was this group that toured around, and they were called the Power Team. And you may have heard this. You can look it up on YouTube sometime. But the Power Team was the bodybuilder guys that they would like bend metal rods, and they would rip phone books in half, and they would do all these physical strengths. And one of the verses that they would kind of like always like drum up support around was this verse from Philippians 4, and you've probably heard this many times. I can do all things through Him who gives me strength. It was like a battle cry for them. And then they would do some amazing feat. In high school, I had some friends that would write this on their basketball sneakers. Like for some reason, if they put a verse on there, I can do all things through Christ who strengthened me, like somehow Jesus would empower them to be able to jump higher, or hit a home run, or do something like that. But this verse, too many times when we try to access this idea of like, yeah, God is inside of me and He's giving me strength to do these great things, we are ripping this verse out of context. So let me show you the context in which it's hidden. Paul was in some really rough situations in his life. The Apostle Paul, who planted these so many of the churches in the early church right after Jesus's resurrection, and was going around and telling people of what their lives could be. And groups of community were being formed around this, and things were very hard for them. It was really hard for Paul. And Paul's talking about those hard things, and this is where this verse comes from. So right before verse 13, we read, and Paul's saying, "For I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through Him who gives me strength." So for Paul, it wasn't about dunking a basketball or doing something awesome, or tearing a phone book off, of like accessing some kind of physical strength that God was providing. But this idea of doing all things for Paul was persevering, was getting through, and being, as he says, the secret of being content in every situation. For Paul, the need that he had, he could recognize that it was so much more than the physical needs around him. It was so much more than any of that, because he was attuning himself to this godly way of living, like Peter said in the first passage. And he was going, I can be content in whatever my external circumstance, because God is doing a work in me, that it's by accessing the reality of that regardless of what's going on around me, I can see that it is God who can help me get through any of these things. And so I kind of hope as our semester winds down and you find yourself, I know, overwhelmed with so many things left to do, whether it's coursework or being stretched in many different situations. And I know a lot of you are still wanting to see friends and hang out with friends, and that's still complicated and difficult. And there's also the anxiety of it's done in a couple weeks, and what's going to exist after this, and what's going to happen during the summer. But may you hold to this truth. Everything you need to live this godly life is already at work in you. It's us just opening ourselves to that reality. And regardless of the hard things, regardless of the difficult things, regardless of the struggles that you come up against in this next week, you are able to live not only through those, but in those situations as God is doing the work in you. As we fix our eyes on Him, we recognize that God is able to carry us in those moments. And as Paul says, we can be content in those things because we recognize that whatever the difficulty of the situation around us is not the end of us. So I hope in your groups you can maybe talk and process this a little bit and see what resonates with you and continue to pray for you. And if you need something, please let me know, pass that along to me. And I hope you all are continuing to seek Jesus and meet together and strive to live those holy lives that God is doing that work in us to live. So blessings on you today and this evening and whenever you watch this, and talk to you soon.